For a long time, millions of Americans relied on Norah O'Donnell to bring them the day's most important stories. Her demeanor, steady, graceful, and always ready, helped her become a widely recognized figure in broadcast journalism. But underneath that poised exterior lay an experience that rattled her more deeply than any urgent news report ever had. An unexpected note from her doctor forced O'Donnell to confront something she had never truly reckoned with: the reality of her own death. That encounter would quietly reshape the path of her life, the same life that had built a trusted voice in American news. Well before she rose to prominence as a familiar face on national television, Norah O'Donnell's character had been shaped by a rare mix of rigor, curiosity, and global experience. Born in Washington, D.C., she came from a family devoted to public service. Her father, Francis Lawrence O'Donnell, served both as a physician and an Army officer, while her mother, Norah Bernardet O'Kane, had roots stretching back to Ireland. The family's history reached into Derry, Belfast, and County Donegal, connecting Norah to generations of immigrants who had crossed the Atlantic hoping for a better life. 3 of her grandparents were immigrants themselves. One had even spent over a decade in the United States without legal papers before eventually building a stable existence. When Norah was quite young, the family moved to San Antonio, Texas, where she spent most of her childhood. Yet her upbringing wasn't confined to one place. At age 10, her father's military duties brought the family to South Korea. For 2 years, they lived at Yongsan Garrison in Seoul, an experience that immersed young Norah in a wholly different culture during her formative years. While there, something unexpected happened that would quietly hint at her future career. As an elementary school student, she recorded videotaped English lessons for the Korean Educational Development Institute. It was a minor project, but it marked her very first involvement in broadcasting. After returning to Texas, she attended Douglas MacArthur High School in San Antonio and graduated with impressive academic standing. Her ambitions next took her to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., a school famous for turning out journalists, diplomats, and political leaders. At Georgetown, Norah majored in philosophy, a discipline that nurtures deep reflection on ethics, truth, and society, themes that would later run through much of her reporting. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree and, years later, returned to complete a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies. Her professional life began not in front of a camera, but behind the scenes, in political journalism. She wrote for Roll Call, a newspaper covering Congress, where she reported on the daily workings of Capitol Hill. That job demanded sharp attention to detail and the skill to explain complex political matters clearly to readers. It quickly built her reputation as a journalist who grasped both policy details and the personalities behind them. From there, she moved into national television. For over a decade, she worked across various NBC platforms. As a commentator on The Today Show, a chief Washington correspondent for MSNBC, and a White House correspondent for NBC News. Her work appeared regularly on NBC Nightly News, Dateline NBC, and MSNBC Live. She also filled in as host of Hardball with Chris Matthews and frequently appeared as a political analyst on The Chris Matthews Show. Those years gave Norah O'Donnell something few journalists ever obtain: credibility spanning multiple major news outlets. Producers believed in her reporting, co-workers respected her thoroughness, and audiences recognized her steady hand during critical national moments. Still, even as her career climbed, none of those achievements could brace her for the personal crisis that would strike unexpectedly years later. By the time Norah O'Donnell stood at the summit of her television career, she had reported on wars, presidential races, and countless national emergencies. She had interviewed world leaders, covered the White House, and eventually become the anchor and managing editor of one of the nation's most significant news programs. From the outside, her life seemed a model of discipline, steadiness, and achievement. But in the late autumn of one year, a single email from her doctor changed everything. It came shortly after Thanksgiving, an urgent message asking her to call her physician right away about some test results. At first, she tried to stay calm. She told her parents, and together they guessed it was probably basal cell carcinoma, a fairly common and treatable skin cancer that several family members had already dealt with. But when she finally spoke with her doctor, the truth was far grimmer. The diagnosis was melanoma. Unlike many other skin cancers, melanoma can turn deadly if it spreads. Hearing that word forced O'Donnell to face something she had never fully thought through. For a woman who had built a career asking hard questions and analyzing major events, this moment became deeply personal. She later confessed that her first reaction to the diagnosis was to cry. In interviews years afterward, she called it one of the scariest moments of her life. For the first time, she said, she had to contemplate her own death. Her fear wasn't just for herself. O'Donnell and her husband, restaurateur Jeff Tracy, were raising 3 young children. Their twins, Grace and Henry, were growing fast, and their younger daughter, Riley, was still very small. The thought that her health could suddenly worsen made everything more terrifying. O'Donnell later said the diagnosis also marked the first time her children had to confront the possibility that something serious could happen to their mother. Doctors acted swiftly. The melanoma had been caught early, before it could penetrate deeper into her skin. Still, surgery was required. A sizable patch of skin was removed from the upper part of her back to fully eradicate the cancer. The operation left a long scar, but it also almost certainly saved her life. Afterward, O'Donnell entered a lengthy period of monitoring. Because melanoma can recur, doctors advised frequent dermatological exams. She started getting skin checks every few months, along with multiple biopsies whenever suspicious spots turned up. That routine became a permanent fixture in her life. Yet rather than conceal the experience, O'Donnell chose to talk about it openly. She shared her story publicly and discussed the diagnosis on national television, describing how frightening it had been for her and her family. Her message was straightforward yet powerful. Early detection saves lives. She urged viewers to schedule regular skin exams, wear sunscreen, and pay attention to any changes in their skin. For someone who had spent years telling other people's stories, this one was suddenly her own. And even though she healed physically, the emotional aftermath of that diagnosis would linger for a long time. Inside the newsroom, Norah O'Donnell had weathered one terrifying medical crisis. But just a few years later, another health emergency arrived without warning. By then, she had already assumed one of the most grueling roles in television journalism, leading a major evening news broadcast. That position demanded constant travel, long hours, and the duty to cover major world events as they broke. The pace rarely let up, and the pressure to perform at that level daily could be crushing. Then one day, her body forced her to halt. The situation unfolded in a way that even surprised her doctors. According to her husband, Jeff Tracy, O'Donnell had been feeling abdominal pain, but kept pushing through her routine. She even played 2 hours of tennis, while unknowingly suffering from appendicitis. The symptoms had been building for days, but like many people with demanding jobs, she initially brushed them aside and kept working. Eventually, the pain became unbearable. Doctors quickly determined she needed immediate surgery. O'Donnell was hospitalized and underwent a laparoscopic appendectomy, a procedure to remove the inflamed appendix before it could burst. The surgery went well, but it required her to take time off work to recover. Soon after, Jeff Tracy posted a hospital photo on social media, revealing what had happened. O'Donnell herself later wrote a message explaining the experience and reflecting on what she had learned. She admitted that the surgery had reminded her how fragile everyday health can be and how easily one takes a pain-free day for granted. She also encouraged people not to ignore what their bodies are telling them and to seek medical help when something feels wrong. The job strain also sometimes bled into her family life. O'Donnell and her husband, Jeff Tracy, had built a life balancing 2 demanding careers. Tracy ran several successful restaurants, while O'Donnell traveled often and worked long hours covering national events. Despite the challenges, she frequently spoke about how supportive her husband had been through the years. On days when work left her especially drained, she described how he would make sure dinner was ready at home, creating small islands of stability after chaotic workdays. Even with that support, there were times when journalism's demands left little room for rest. O'Donnell once joked that she had avoided disconnecting from work entirely for years because she feared missing a major story. At one point, She finally decided to step away from her email during the holiday season and took 2 full weeks without checking work messages. It was the first time she had allowed herself that kind of break in a very long time. Moments like that helped her see how easily the boundaries between career and personal life could vanish. Yet despite the pressure, she stayed deeply committed to journalism. She often called her work a privilege, saying that reporting on history as it unfolded gave her a unique view of the world. But the pressures around her career weren't limited to long hours or emotional stress. As her profile grew within the media world, criticism from other journalists and commentators also intensified, and one particular interview would eventually trigger a new wave of public debate about her work. By the later stage of her CBS career, Norah O'Donnell had interviewed presidents, covered multiple administrations, and reported on some of the most consequential political moments in modern American history. Few journalists ever reached that level of influence. Yet the same visibility that gave her a powerful platform also meant that every decision she made would be closely examined, sometimes by critics eager to judge her performance. One of the most talked about moments came when O'Donnell conducted a major interview with Donald Trump for 60 minutes. That conversation quickly became one of the year's most widely discussed television interviews. Some viewers thought she handled it professionally, asking a wide range of questions while letting the former president respond fully. Others felt the interview should have been more confrontational. Several prominent media figures publicly criticized her approach. Commentator Megyn Kelly spoke openly about her frustration during a podcast episode, arguing that O'Donnell seemed overly cautious and that the conversation lacked the aggressive follow-up questions Kelly expected from a political interview. Kelly even went so far as to say O'Donnell's interviewing style was frustrating to watch. Another journalist, Joy Reid, expressed similar criticism on social media. Reid argued that the interview allowed Trump to repeat several claims without sufficient correction, suggesting that stronger pushback should have been offered during the conversation. The criticism spread rapidly through political media circles, with commentators debating whether O'Donnell had been too restrained or appropriately professional. Not everyone agreed with the negative reactions. Some analysts defended O'Donnell's approach, arguing that an interviewer doesn't always need to interrupt constantly to challenge a guest. Commentators on several news programs pointed out that she had, in fact, asked tough questions and let viewers hear the responses directly rather than turning the interview into a confrontation. Through all the criticism, O'Donnell herself remained mostly silent. She rarely responded publicly to personal attacks or commentary about her work. Instead, she kept focusing on reporting and interviews, maintaining the same professional style that had defined her career for decades. Behind the scenes, however, another major change was already coming. After years of leading the evening news broadcast, O'Donnell announced that she would step away from the anchor desk following the presidential election cycle. The decision surprised many viewers who had grown used to seeing her deliver the nightly news. For O'Donnell, though, the move represented a shift rather than a retirement. Instead of leaving journalism, she transitioned into a new role as a senior correspondent for the network. That position allowed her to focus more on long-form reporting and major interviews, including projects for 60 Minutes and other CBS programs. The change also gave her a chance to regain some control over a schedule that had been dominated by the daily demands of anchoring a national broadcast. For someone who had spent years delivering headlines to millions of viewers every evening, stepping away from that role carried emotional weight. Yet the choice reflected a deeper understanding that life, careers, and priorities sometimes evolve after moments that force people to rethink what truly matters. Norah O'Donnell had built a remarkable career in journalism, one shaped by determination, resilience, and a willingness to face hard truths. She had dealt with health scares, criticism, professional pressure, and the constant scrutiny that comes with public life. Through it all, she kept doing what journalists are trained to do: ask questions, hunt for facts, and tell stories that matter. And although her television role changed, her voice in journalism didn't disappear. Instead, it simply moved into a new chapter. Norah O'Donnell has spent decades covering the world's biggest stories. Yet some of the hardest moments happened in her own life, away from the cameras. From terrifying health scares to intense public criticism, her journey shows how complicated life behind the news desk can be. What do you think about Norah O'Donnell's career and her decision to step away from the anchor desk? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories about the people behind the headlines.